Thank you, Mike, for joining us. We understand that ABC has over 21,000 members, and you have been developing a survey for over 20 years where you're tracking contractor backlog and confidence going forward. And you recently published your April numbers, which I believe are here on the backlog indicator. And so I just was hoping you could walk us through kind of the highlights and what this tells you, where you see, optimism or concern.
So first, let's explain and help understand what these numbers represent. So the number that you see under April 2021 is 7.9. That is 7.9 months of backlog. So in simple terms, if a contractor was a $12 million a year contractor that did $1 million of revenue in burn, they would have $7.9 million of backlog on their books. Now, what does backlog mean? That means signed and sealed contracts, real projects. These aren't speculative. It's not members saying, oh, I think I'm going to win this project, or a client that solely negotiates with that contractor says, we're going to have another project coming up. No, this is a contracted, fully funded project. So it's real construction backlog measured in months. And so we utilize this and we get our members to relate their backlog in terms of dollars to their previous year revenues. That's how we come up with the months. It's aggregated by different industry segments, different regions, as well as different company sizes. Obviously, those are important because, as you can see, for the company sizes, the larger companies have a tendency to get larger projects that take longer to build. And so their contracts have a longer tail on it. So hence their backlog is much higher in terms of months than a company size of less than $30 million that might have a series of projects. It might be a $500,000 or a $5 million project, et cetera. So you can see how that takes a look. If we actually take a look at the graph, I always like to look at the backlog indicator in the context of history. And so that 7.9 months of backlog is compared to an 8.9 months of backlog in January of 2020. So that was pre-COVID. So it would be logical to conclude that when COVID entered, projects probably were put on hold. So backlog might stay actually steady because in some states, the construction was halted by state mandate. We were fully open in the United States in June of last year, but many states were halted up until June, but we were fully back to work as construction was determined to be an essential industry. So we saw a significant drop off between January and March, April, as people worked their backlog off in January, February, March. Things were shut down about mid-March. People put the brakes on, so there was really nothing new added. And then we saw a peak, little mini peak, back in June when all of a sudden construction's essential. We can go back. Some work came through in the pipeline, added to the backlog, but it's been pretty steady over the last 6 to 8 months in terms of backlog. No real growth and no real runoff, which means to me that there's been still a little bit of confidence, waiting for the vaccine to take place. We got a new administration. What are the economic policies going to be? What's the Fed going to do with interest rates? So, a lot of questions that are out there. So people might be still a little hesitant to pull the go, no go decision.
One thing I did notice, Mike, was that kind of where you referenced back to January, February, pre-pandemic, 8.9 months of backlog. Is it fair to say that if we're sitting around 7.9 currently and we were at 8.9 pre-pandemic, we've experienced a 10% reduction in backlog?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think what we've done is we have run off greater backlog. We've run off more work that we have under contract than we've brought on in new business, so to speak. When I look at the period high, that was back in 2018. We're at a period high of 9.9 months. And if you remember the Great Recession, the period low back in 2009, 2010 was 5.81 months. When you think about pre-COVID levels, between that 9.9 and 8.9 months, those from 2018 to 2019, it was feeling pretty good in our industry, in our economy. So when I think about a healthy backlog, I'm thinking that 8.9 to 9.9 months, so 9 to 10 months, that's pretty healthy. And that's the period highs that we have. So now that we're at 7.9, still well above. I mean, we hit just above, I think 7.1 months in November of 20 was our low point in our construction backlog indicator. Still well above that 5.81 months period low back in 2009. So I think we're in pretty good shape with regards to backlog personally. So the backlog here is the vertical blue bars. And you can see that peak period in 2018 was about 9.9 months. And you can see also what we did with this over the course of time. We were doing on a quarterly basis. We made a decision to do it monthly. And then we synced it up with our construction confidence index to see what kind of correlation it is. Now we've got, a lot of great points. And so the confidence index, well, the backlog says, what do I currently have locked in under contract? The confidence index is asking our members 3 questions. The first question, sales. How confident are you in your sales increasing over the next 6 months? Generally speaking, any number greater than 50 is positive. Anything below 50 is negative. Profit margins. How confident are you in your profit margins increasing over the next 6 months? And staffing levels. How confident are you in your staffing levels increasing over the next 6 months? Meaning, are you going to have to hire people? So you can correlate those with employment rates and jobless claims and all that kind of stuff. One thing I love about this confidence index, and I wrote down some numbers, and I just want to look at the sum in April of 21 in terms of sales. That's the first 3 sales expectation. You can see we have up big, up small, no change, down small, down big. So right now, sales confidence is so high that only about 19 to 20% think sales over the next 6 months are going to be down. As a matter of fact, when you compare that to March of last year, when the pandemic hit, we literally, when everything hit, we were doing the survey. It was fascinating. That number was 56.7% thought that it was going to be down small or big. And you can see a year ago in April, about the same number. So you can see where confidence, when you think about it in terms of the negative, where it's come from in terms of sales. Look at the profits. Profits are about 28% now. Think it's down small, down big. Back in that day in March of 2020 was 55.2% was down big. And the nice thing I think the ultimate confidence is, how are you going to be hiring? Well, look at this number, April 2021. Only 8.6% think they're not going to be hiring. I mean, think they're going to be letting people go over the next 6 months. That's absolutely fascinating. And we saw a nice tick up in this back in the early days of the previous administration with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. We saw a big tick when they started talking about that tax policies, because what happens was that administration started giving the confidence that this administration was going to help job creators create jobs. And so you can see in 2016 where those numbers were before, and you can see that kind of dipped down at that last bit of November and stuff. And then when that administration came in, you can see the steady confidence that reinforced over the course of that period. So in a lot of early days of 2018, you can see that big tick up there around October of 2018. A lot of confidence in those things. So it was pretty relevant at that point in time. So this backlog of real projects, real work under contract, combined with the sentiment. And these are CEOs, presidents, owners of businesses that are completing this survey. They have a very, very good insight, obviously, into what's happening in their business on the ground at that moment to be able to indicate their confidence in sales, profits, and staffing. So those are some nice leading indicators along with that backlog indicator. Let me just walk through the pandemic element and just think about some of the milestones of events that occurred that helped with CEO confidence, because this was really critical. The administration really reacted quickly. And then you had the fragmentation that occurred across the country in terms of different geographies with different states being open or locked down to some point. So you can see confidence plummeted immediately, but confidence rose really quickly over the next 3 months. Well, you remember we had the Paycheck Protection Plan, and that gave people the confidence to keep their staff on board. And then phase two came in towards the end of the year that allowed us to keep it going further. And then the news of the vaccine, and then states opening up. When you really think about this, both administrations have done a fantastic job in controlling confidence, because as you all know, CEO confidence is related to predictability, their ability to predict their future. If a CEO is confident in the future and they have a vision of the predictability that's going to be better, they're more apt to make that investment in staff or buy that piece of equipment. So that's why this, coupled with the backlog indicator, and I think coupled with your indexes, is really powerful. I think looking forward, what's going to be interesting, I've been talking to some members about the material pricing issues, the lumber, the steel, the concern about maybe, supply becoming scarce. I haven't seen that flow through in a negative effect in terms of overall confidence. I think people understand that the reaction of the supply chain is natural. When you take a look at the pandemic and you look at the out of whack demand and supply, all of a sudden there was zero demand, but yet the supply was going in. The shutdown occurs and they shut down plants, and then supply starts ramping up. So there's a lag. It will be interesting to see how your index and how backlog and confidence kind of predict the impact of this material pricing and supply chain constraints. Well, thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it.